Welcome back to the Her Hoop Stats podcast. You get a treat today, people. First time ever, me and Richard are going together. We'll see how this goes, because I know for me, every time I'm, usually I'm in the background when Richard goes, but I learn something from him every day. So I'm excited to get to talk to him today. How's it going, my friend?
Yeah, I'm good. You're putting the pressure on me to come up with something that means you're learning now. So we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, giving you all the pressure. That way I could just host and just, make my joke here and there, and no one is the wiser.
Yeah.
Last night we had a full slate of games. Um, After having none on Tuesday, which I'm not even going to get into the scheduling of the
Yeah.
WNBA. That just drives me nuts. But last night's games, I'll just kind of hit it in reverse order real quick. Just kind of hit the highlights from each one. The Seattle Washington game. Washington winds up coming out 78-64 victory. Shakira Austin leads the way with a double-double. I thought this one was a complete opposite of the way the game went on Sunday when these two teams fought. Um, Seattle seemed to really control things this weekend, and then last night Washington was in control from the start. In their victory, I still saw some things just here and there from our fam that just shows me she's going to be fun to watch as she continues progressing through her career. The Portland Fire get a 10-point victory over the Connecticut Sun for their fifth. They are 5-3, as we were talking about on air. Who had that on their bingo card for Portland to be 5-3 this year? Led the way by Bridget Carlton's 13 points, 7 rebounds. Minnesota still without Nafisa Collier. Still waiting on when we'll hear when she's coming back. But they get their victory over the Atlanta Dream, 96-81. Natasha Howard has found the fountain of youth with 22 points and 8 rebounds, and is a huge contributor there. The Toronto Tempo had a hard-fought victory over the Chicago Sky, 111-104. Marina Mabry down the stretch just seemed to hit bucket after bucket after bucket for them. Niara Sabli got a career high with 29 points. In the first game of the night, the Liberty take down the Mercury in what I call the retro game, as it had both teams in their jerseys that they wore when the league first started, which was really cool to see.
Well,
Maria
I like
Johannes.
New York. I'm not so sure about those bright orange Mercury.
Well, I agree.
They should
They
maybe
have
be left
improved.
in history.
Yeah, the Phoenix has improved their look over the years. But yes, it was definitely fun to watch that and them in their retro jerseys. Maria Johannes was 7 3-pointers on the night. Just seemed to be clicking on all cylinders there. What did you see from the games last night that you kind of zeroed in on, and any kind of thoughts you have?
Well, to go in order with the same way you did it, Washington, Seattle. Seattle still looked like a team where we're hoping to see a lot more later in the season rather than what we're seeing now.
Yeah.
They look like they're messy. There's not a lot that's rolling smoothly from game to game from them. Obviously, we're hoping to see what Malonga and Magbagor and Fam can do as a unit rather than with two of them sat there in street clothes watching, our Fam learn what the league's about for 5 to 10 minutes. Washington, as we're going to see with young teams, inconsistent from game to game, but can be great on the right night and against the right team, but can also be pretty awful on the wrong night. We've seen that a couple, along the way as well. They're going to be fun. They're fun to watch. I like Georgia Raymore, speeding things up for them. It's Sonia Citron is, for a second-year player, incredibly skilled and smooth. And then, it would be lovely to see Shakira Austin actually healthy for a full season and able to show what she can do when you get to build a full season game to game rather than constantly fighting to come back from injuries and coping with that all the way along. Portland being 5-3 is and you can't, given they've beaten New York twice, you can't say this has been like a cupcake schedule that's helped them along the way, even though
Right.
the fact that they've done that means that New York's record is lower than was expected. So they're, you know, if you were doing a strength of schedule purely via maths, then it's probably not that high yet. But yeah, Portland winning 5 games already. Just like last year with Golden State, it's starting to prove that the expansion teams, if they're like organized and work hard, then there are wins there in this league. You can be competitive already. And Toronto are doing the same thing. Beat Chicago fairly comfortably last night in the end. I think we're getting to see with Toronto just how vital Niara Sabally is to this team. You you might have Sykes and Mabry putting up most of the points on a nightly basis, but in terms of how important any given individual player is on that roster, whether Niara Sabally manages to stay healthy again, like Austin in Washington, they need her on the court
Mhm.
because there's not that much behind her, especially with Temi Fagbenle being injured again all year long. Izzy Harrison still hasn't played. They need Sabally to stay in one piece. She limped off again last night with what looked like probably an ankle injury. You're afraid for her pretty much every game because I've seen her go off in so many contests, both in the WNBA and in Europe, internationally and in club. It seems like she's one of the more fragile players in world women's basketball, and it's a shame because we've seen what she can do. Last night she lit it up,
Yep.
including from outside, which I don't you don't really expect to see from her. But yeah, Camila Cardoso got shut down, which isn't actually that unusual, unfortunately. But her inconsistencies are frustrating. But yeah, Minnesota managing to beat Atlanta. I think a lot of people doubted Minnesota going into the season,
Mhm.
understandably, given how many players they've lost. And all they're doing is proving that you don't underestimate a Cheryl Reeve coached basketball team because they look remarkably like the teams that we've watched for the last couple of years, despite how many players they've lost. The difference that Miles makes to their to their offense means there are obviously sort of transition changes to how they're going to attack other teams. But in terms of the chemistry, the structure, the balance of the side, that for a team that's only played 7 games with 3 new starters, a completely overhauled bench, most of whom are injured anyway, it's remarkable they're 5-2 and that they've done it against some good teams, winning some close games. This is it's a team that's going to win more games than most people had them down to do in the preseason. And lots of teams are missing players injured or have been missing players waiting for them to come from overseas. Minnesota are the only ones who are missing an MVP candidate.
Right.
This is the only team who's waiting for an absolute superstar to return to their lineup, unless you're going to count Satu Sabally, who has played about 5 minutes in New York. But generally speaking, Minnesota are the ones who have the chance to be a lot better than they are already. And on most sensible sort of systems, they're currently top of the standings at 5-2.
Mhm.
I said last night on social media that technically, if you use FIBA scoring, then Portland are top of the standings, but that's because they give points for losses. So yeah, that doesn't really count. And then New York got the win, which was mostly came down to the run they had at the end of the third quarter, where they started playing some defense and started pressing full court, and it created the massive run. And they mostly did it with players who have been there all season and have been healthy, but you still see what I talked about in preseason with the depth of this team, in that you can press, you can play high tempo because you can sub a lot if you want to and need to with this New York team because they've got good players all the way down the roster. Raquel Carrera hasn't really got in for more than about 2 minutes yet since she arrived because DeMarco has decided he doesn't need her or doesn't trust her yet. And the run was mostly created by Rebecca Allen, Astier, and who else was that? Oh, and Rebecca Gardner
Yep.
was the perimeter when they were making that big run. But they still had Phoebic on the bench. They had Lainey Hamilton back last night. This is a team that can throw a lot of players at you. And I think once they manage to work out how their rotation is going to work, obviously they're waiting for big players to get healthy and actually mesh in as well. But I think the strength of this team, more than waiting for their superstars to fit in better, is to use everybody, because their ninth, 10th, 11th player are much better than most other teams' ninth, 10th, 11th player. So you need to use that and keep going down the bench and use those minutes, especially if you're going to press high with what worked last night for them. You can play more pressure if you give people the rest they need and only play them 20, 25 minutes rather than trying to fit them in for 30 and 35.
Yeah, I think the Liberty, like you just said, that they're so deep, and once they get everyone healthy, they're gonna be a team that's right there in the thick of things. For Phoenix, I did, even though it wasn't their best night, and like you said, their third quarter was. I almost tweeted out. I said this to some people I was watching the game with, but it was almost biblical because I felt like they haven't scored in 40 days and 40 nights, and I think New York went on. I think they won that third quarter 30-12. I'm sitting here looking at the box score now. Um, but Phoenix, you can see some flashes of what people have been saying. They were waiting on Monique McCall to get there and get the plan for them. And I think you can see things from her that showed you that she's going to help them here down the stretch as we get further into the season. So that's hope and things there for Coach Tibbett and his crew. Um, yeah, I don't. I mean, you talked about the bringing pressure and things like that. So it kind of leads me into my next point that I wanted to talk about today, which is the freedom of movement, where they it's supposed to be one of the things that they're going to enforce this year in officiating. Is the freedom of movement deal. I Like I was telling you before we came on to recording, I look at it from a coach's perspective, and the only technical foul I ever got in my coaching career, it was a time where I'm arguing that a call should have been made. Now this ref had called it 2 or 3 times previous to me arguing it, and it was blatant call, did not get called. The referee looks at me and says, "Coach, I can't call them all." And yes, you can. If it's a foul, it's a foul. And I feel like that's the same frustrations I'm having with the freedom of movement interpretation. How do you, for just to kind of break it down for layman's terms, what is your interpretation of that rule?
Wow. As I said at the start of the season, I tend to compare rule books.
Mhm.
When the new one comes out, I have it up on a PDF and compare it to the previous one. This year's rule book is word for word the same as last year's. They have not changed anything apart from the front cover was a slightly different color. Um, so it's all about interpretation and what the referees association has told their officials to call. And you I mean, we obviously have seen it. The number of fouls being called in games this year is significantly higher, has led to complaints from people talking about, how long the games are, how stilted it is, how many times you have to watch people shooting free throws. It's about trying to open the game up on the perimeter in particular, because that's where, people see the players getting held up. It's obviously become somewhat annoyingly difficult for anyone to set a screen because any scrap of movement on a pick is getting called, especially if the defender falls over. Um, Chipping players when they cross through the lane used to be normal, common practice, and they're calling that much more. But like you say, the problem is, can they call everything? Because if they because they're not, even now, like you say. And if they do, then it's going to be even worse than it already is. And people are going to complain about games going over 3 hours rather than going over 2.5. Um, I haven't seen a lot of changes yet from the teams and the players in response to how the games are being officiated this year, which is obviously the goal from the officiating. You call games like this in order to get the teams and the coaches to change how they're approaching playing defense. You call every hand check in order to try and stop people
Right.
hand checking and grabbing and on all of that. You don't call it so that you can then continue calling 50 fouls in every game for the rest of the season. That's not the target. So to a certain extent, we're still waiting for the response, I think, rather than being in the stage where you are already seeing the response. I think we're still in that early stage, which we were hoping would be kind of over by now, where the refs are, trying to call what they need to call in order to create the response from the players and the teams. I think we're still there, unfortunately.
Yeah, and it's like you said about calling it, to try and get the teams to change their defensive philosophy. Like tonight's game is we're recording this on Thursday. The game two between the Indiana Fever and the Golden State Valkyries are tonight, and Natalie Nakase is on record as saying that's how they're gonna guard Caitlin Clark. They're gonna be aggressive. They're gonna be all in her to try and throw her off her game, and that goes back to freedom of movement. How many times are you gonna call that? Or are you just gonna let Clark and I'm not fan base baiting here, but how are you gonna let Clark get beat to death and not call it? And then where do you go from there? Are you gonna call it every single time? What are your thoughts on
Uh,
that?
Well, we've seen the same thing in the NBA in the playoffs in the last couple of weeks, where you know, quite rightly, City came out and said, we're going to grab and hold Wembanyama because that's the best way to defend him. And until you make enough calls to stop us doing it, we're going to keep doing it. Because I mean, the clips that I saw from, I think it was game 2, maybe game 3 in that series, where they were just holding him. The guy was just getting hugged basically to stop him moving, and it wasn't getting called. The officials have to handle that, because otherwise, it as a team, if that's the best way to defend a guy or a woman in our league, then you have to push the limits, because that's your job. You're out there to try and win the game. If the officials aren't going to call that and that's the best way to defend them, then you have to do that. That's what you're required to do, is to find the best way and the most effective way to do it. So it's up to the officials to stop you doing that. And like you say, you have to make those calls to force the changes. That's the whole point of this new approach. And I was one of the defenders of this approach from the officials, because we didn't want it carrying on the way it was last season. I don't think anyone wanted the level of physicality and contact that we saw towards the end of last season,
Yeah.
that was leading to a lot of injuries, was leading to people basically just beating each other up in the paint, and the officials saying, what are we supposed to do? So you change it to this new approach, and you hope that the teams change what they're doing. But we're still getting there. Hopefully we will get there more, because personally, I like FIBA games that are done in about an hour and 40 minutes. I'm not a fan of these WNBA games that are going to last over 2.5 hours. So yeah, hopefully we're getting somewhere, but yeah, we're definitely not there yet.
Yeah, and I'm not gonna spend too much time on this, but another call that happened last night, actually in the Liberty Mercury game, the clear path foul. They called it one time last night, and the broadcasters were just adamant. Yeah, that's a perfect example of a clear path. And I looked at the screen, and they showed it on the replay, and there's like 6 people, 3 of each team ahead of the ball, and I said, "Okay, where's the clear path?" Now it was a foul. Brianna Stewart went behind and swiped, and she got all body and a little bit of ball, but mostly body when she swiped to get the ball, and so it was a foul. But I'm not no sure it was a clear path foul because you have so. But that's another. It's up to interpretation, and I feel like they need to do a better job of interpreting that rule.
Well, part of the problem is that most of our broadcasters don't understand the rule book,
Yeah,
which means then the fans don't understand it because it doesn't get explained well unless Ryan Rucco's working the game.
yeah,
Um, it wasn't a clear path foul, but it was a transition take foul,
yeah,
which are two different things. Two different things in the rule book. Um, in fact, one of the lines of the transition take foul requirements is does not meet the standards for a clear path foul.
mhm,
Um, yeah, but they don't call that consistently either. They don't call either of them consistently, unfortunately. But what we have at least managed to remove to a certain extent is we used to get multiple video reviews for clear path fouls,
yes,
and yeah, bringing in the transition take foul has at least gotten rid of that. But they don't call it consistently enough, unfortunately. Which, especially this year, it's yeah they barely called it at all, and that's not because the play has been taken out of the game by the new rule. It's because they've stopped calling it as much as they did before. I don't know why, but yes, I wish our broadcasters understood the rules better. Unfortunately, but usually they don't.
yeah. I'm right there with you. You talked a little bit about the rise in injuries because of the way that the fouls were being called. There's one injury that I've noticed a lot. It's happened a lot. We're 6, 7 games into this season, and there seems to be like I think there's 8 or 9 concussions already in the league this year. What do you attribute that rise to?
I mean, hopefully that's just a small sample size and bad luck.
Mm,
Um, I complained about it more last year in that they seem to stop calling sort of incidental, accidental, sometimes accidental contact to the head as any kind of flagrant foul. And what I keep pushing for is that you need to put the onus on the player who's committing the foul to avoid hitting people in the head rather than just say, oh, that was an accident, wave it off, and say that's part of basketball. And, sometimes people are going to get hit. I fully accept sometimes people are going to get hit. This is a
yeah,
physical game. You're playing in a small area, but you need to make people more aware and make them want to avoid hitting people rather than just accept it as part of the action. The fact that we've had so many in this early season is concerning. Maybe it means the diagnosis is better because people are actually getting diagnosed as having them rather than just saying, "Oh, shake it off, get back out there," kind of
yeah.
approach to it. Which would be a good thing. If that's the reason they're going up, then maybe that's a good thing that people are actually sitting out and taking the time to recover properly. But yeah, we have it's happening too much. I mean, we talk about knee injuries happening too much, which is absolutely true as well. But hopefully, it's more avoidable the sort of head contact in the game that we should be able to avoid that one way or another. But yeah, it's happened a lot early in the season, and it's unfortunate. Hopefully, it tails off, and it is just a freak of numbers.
Well, I thought, and I brought this up to you when I sent my notes on kind of what I wanted to talk about today. Uh, I want to end the show here with a little bit of fun. And because we always make the joke of international, and off air we talk about especially when you and Chelsea go together. It's the international show, and all the Americans are just gonna love it, and So I want to have a little bit of fun, and I want to give you a chance to kind of, and this is purely your favorite, your picks, your top. Give me 10 of all international team because we have such an influx of international talent coming into the league now with the rise in the contracts and the new CBA and things like that. What are your top 10 players for all international team that you've seen so far in 2026 in WNBA?
Okay, so firstly, I made different shortlists for this, and I had like the first list was players who'd be there on merit,
Okay.
which ended up like about 15 players long. Then I had my fun list, which was just players who I would want to have included in this. Many of whom have missed a lot of games injured. This kind of brought home how many players have been injured already this season
Yep.
as well. That one was over 20 players long and didn't include anyone from the first 15 player list. And then there was a third list about players we haven't really seen yet this season, either due to showing up late, not getting enough time off the bench,
Okay.
or again, some being injured. And that was another 10 on top. So that kind of illustrates how many international players there are in
Yes.
this league at the moment. Okay, I kind of did it like a roster. My starting five was Pauline Astier, who's been, had an incredible start to her New York career. I don't think anyone expected her to come in and be this effective this fast. Playing next to her, Marina Hannis, quite obviously, because she is wildly entertaining to watch, whether she's on or off. You're going to get these ridiculous 1 foot fadeaway sideways threes, and then occasionally you're going to get a behind the head pass that goes into the fifth row. And you have to accept both sides of her because she is not going to change. I think she's 30 now, and yeah, this has been how she's played her entire career. And yeah, it's not going to change. You get the good and the bad. You've gotten quite a lot of good so far this season, which has helped New York stay afloat while they've been missing so many players. Jovana Nogic has had a great start in Phoenix. I was not expecting her to be this good for the Mercury. I was expecting her to be more a complementary piece, and she's, had a great start for them, including playing out of position because she's not really a point guard, and they've asked her to do that. I included Gabby Williams, who some people, wouldn't consider an international player, but she plays for the French national team, so she gets to count as French for this concept. She's obviously fit in very well in Golden State. She does a lot of what they already had, but just takes it to another, gives them another option, another offensive option who wants to be on the ball, wants to create, gives them a secondary ball handler alongside Burton. And I had Niara Sabally after last night at center in that starting lineup. You could argue maybe Camila Cardoso, given the numbers that she's put up in Chicago, which look a lot better on paper than what I see on the court, unfortunately, with Cardoso, where you don't know what you're getting from game to game. You see too many unfortunate mistakes where, the ball gets stripped from her or she commits dumb fouls, for want of a better term, which take her out of the game. And that's too much of a flaw. So yeah, I went with Sabally as the center. My bench was Carla Late, who's been fantastic in Portland. Better than I possibly expected from her because I'm still slightly concerned about her as a point guard. I like her as a scorer, although she's not the most efficient when she's having the right night, and when she can get by people, she can score at will and is a lot of fun to watch. But yeah, whether she can run a team was a question, and that's getting better. She's still only 21, so yeah, that's the sort of stuff you learn as you grow and get better and gain more experience. Most point guards aren't fully formed point guards who can run a team and manage a team until at least their mid-20s. Bridget Carlton, Canadian, therefore an international player. Obviously the first pick, the first player for Portland, and when the team's 5-3 and you're their star player, you're probably doing something right. And I think they're using her as much as for her playing performance. It's to set the style and the culture. Is you bring someone in who's been in Minnesota, being part of what we talked about earlier with the Cheryl Reeve team. That's you set the style. You know what you're going to get from a game to game in terms of effort and being in the right place at the right time. And she's doing that. And that team is producing more than we expected, and that's partly down to her. The rest of my sort of bench, Janelle Salon, again part of that long-armed unit in Golden State, doing a lot of the same stuff that Gabby Williams is doing. The Golden State numbers continue to look ridiculous because they don't shoot that well from the floor, but then they're taking so many threes that makes up for it entirely, and the percentage goes up because, if you're shooting 3 instead of 2, then the percentage doesn't matter that much. And then I had a load of bigs, some of whom, arguably American, arguably international. Natasha Mack, who plays for Macedonia? No, Montenegro. I think it's Montenegro internationally. Sort of signed up to play for them when she was trying to work her way back into the WNBA. That was part of, sort of her turnaround after she'd got knocked out of the league, and is producing as, Phoenix's main big in terms of sort of more traditional players inside. Jessica Shepard as part of the turnaround in Dallas. Again, she's Slovenian. For people that aren't aware, we now have 2 Slovenian players in the league technically. And Awat Kawir next to her in Dallas has had, a nice comeback into the league in that, she's starting to become part of their usage. We're seeing how much range she's got now. She can hit from outside as well. And she's huge. I know when I was at the EuroLeague finals, she is long and, is an impact in the paint when people try and score inside. So, yeah, that was my group that mostly came out of my maybes list rather than my fun list, because otherwise there would have been way more Brits on the list. Apologies to Holly Winterburn for not quite sneaking her onto that group. She can play as the 12th woman like she is currently in Portland, unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Richard, this has been fun. I have enjoyed myself here on this Thursday. We have a couple of really big matchups tonight. Las Vegas and Dallas will go, and obviously the Golden State Indiana rematch that everyone is. Every podcast and every story I've read this week has been about that matchup and what's to come from it. So I guess there'll be a lot of eyeballs on Prime Video this evening.
Yeah, I mean, enjoy recording tomorrow with whatever emerges out of that game. I'm not on, so whoever's recording on that one can pick the bones out of what emerges from there. I'm sure somebody on social media will go completely insane regardless of how it plays out.
Well, as always, thank you all for listening. You can get us every single day right here on any audio platform, Apple, Spotify, we're everywhere, and we are also on here on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, you can check us out at Her Hoop Stats on all your social media platforms. You can catch Richard and all his constructive criticism and fun anecdotes on mostly Blue Sky, but sometimes he pops up on Twitter every once in a while. You can catch me at BMac1435. I do mostly a bunch of retweeting, but sometimes I'll say something here and there. But yeah, thank you all for listening as always, and we will be back tomorrow. And as I look at the schedule, it's Chelsea and Jamie going tomorrow, so that should be fun. Talking about the games from tonight and looking forward to the weekend.
Good luck to them.
All right, thank you all for listening. See you tomorrow.